Hello, and thank you for attending our first staff panel of California's Ocean Science Trust 2026 Sea Change Scholars webinar series, Navigating Your Future Careers at the Ocean and Coastal Science Policy Nexus. My name is Megan Zulian, and I am a Science Policy Fellow at the California Ocean Science Trust, whose mission is to strengthen the connection between scientific research and sound ocean management. Part of Part of meeting this mission includes making investments to support graduate education and ultimately California's science capacity. The Sea Change Scholars webinar series aims to give graduate students a window into real-world ocean and coast-related careers at the science policy interface in California. Last month, we held our kickoff webinar, which provided a 30-minute overview of the various California state entities operating in the ocean and coastal sphere, highlighting their key roles and interconnections. If you weren't able to make it, or if you'd like to review the basics, the recording and slides are available on our website, and that link will be appearing in the chat momentarily. Beginning with today's panel, we'll feature California state entities involved in coast and ocean management, policy, and regulation each month to discuss their careers and the roles they play in the state's science policy landscape. To help you explore careers and learn how the research and skills you are currently developing could impact your journey, we're also providing 2 companion journals for the webinar series. One features guided personal career questions, and the other offers post-panel questions designed to help you consider your personal values and strengths along the real-world insights shared by your guest speakers. Today, we have staff from the California Coastal Commission, whose mission is to protect, conserve, restore, and enhance the environment of the California coastline. We'll start with a few questions we have prepared in advance and then begin to pull in questions from you to continue the discussion. Please use the Q&A feature at the bottom of the Zoom frame to submit questions, and we'll do our best to address any major themes and questions you submit. I'd like to invite panelists to turn on, they'll turn on their camera one by one, starting with Brandon. And could you please give us a brief background on the mission and role of the Coastal Commission?
Sure. Hello, everyone. I'm Brandon Quintana, and I use he, him pronouns. And my current job title is a coastal program analyst at the California Coastal Commission, which is focused on protecting coastal resources and balancing that with development across the state. And I'm in their statewide planning unit, focusing on important statewide issues around like the climate sphere. And I'll pass it to Eric.
Hello, I'm Eric Stevens. My pronouns are he, him, and I work with the Commission's transportation program as our Southern California transportation manager. And I will pass it to Alanna.
And I'm Alanna Casey, she, her, and I am a research data specialist in the mapping unit of the California Coastal Commission, and I'll pass it to Dewi.
Hi everyone, I'm Dewi. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm a new enforcement analyst at the Coastal Commission.
Fantastic. Thank you for your introductions. And yeah, if you could, I'll turn on your video so we could see you all. That would be great. Amazing. As a follow-up to that question, wondering how long you have been in your current position and what was your path to this role? Starting with, we can go in the same order again, starting with Brandon.
Sure, yeah. So I've been in my current role as a coastal program analyst for about a year, maybe like 3, 4 months since November of 2024. And well, maybe I did my math wrong, but yeah, so in that role, but I started with the California Coastal Commission as a California Sea Grant Fellow in January of 2024, which is like a 1-year fellowship. And then I would say that that was probably one of the most like pivotal roles to, getting oriented with like the Coastal Act and like everything that the commission does and kind of like this like state level like policy. But I think before that was the like summer um internship that I had with the Ocean Science Trust. That kind of was like a 3, 4 months kind of thing that helped me like understand how to like coordinate on like a science policy nexus. So Yeah, probably those two. And then I'll pass it to Eric.
I've been in my current role just about 4 months now. But prior to that, I was a senior transportation analyst for the commission for a couple of years. And prior to that, for about a dozen years, I was a planner and supervisor in a couple of different Southern California Coastal Commission offices. I heard about the Coastal Commission at my grad school at Brandon, UC Santa Barbara. I took a class on coastal law and got interested in it. And then I think what really got me on this path is I interned with the San Francisco Bay Commission, which does similar work as the commission. From that, went to the Coastal Commission right after school. And I'll pass it to Alanna.
Thanks, Eric. Yeah, so I've been in my role in the GIS and mapping unit at the Commission for 7 going on 8 years. I similarly came into this role out of grad school. So I went to grad school for history and underwater archaeology, and then continued on PhD in marine social sciences, kind of trying to understand policies around climate change impacts on the coastline, in particular looking at cultural heritage sites. And as when I joined the commission, I got brought on specifically for a project looking at kind of the built environment along the coast, shoreline protection, how that was impacting coastal processes there, and have stayed on in the GIS unit this entire time, moving into more core work of the unit, so more jurisdictional mapping and that kind of work, as well as the special projects. So I will pass it over to Dewi.
Thanks, Alanna. So I've been currently in my role as enforcement analyst for about 3 months. So I'm still very new. The way I got to this role was, I guess, starting in my undergrad. I majored in geology and I did a lot more academic research. It was great to have that hands-on work, but I really wanted to work on projects that directly impacted people who were experiencing climate change today. And that kind of really influenced my decision to go back to grad school, where I got exposed to a lot more opportunities and ideas on how I could be involved and apply my passion beyond academia or traditional environmental consulting. And that and throughout grad school, I did a lot of internships, working for other government, state agencies, as well as affordable housing nonprofits. And through that, I understood what I liked and, most importantly, what I didn't enjoy from working those positions. But throughout that process, I knew I really wanted to be in service to others, which is why I gravitated towards government roles and really thinking about working for the Coastal Commission. So after I graduated this past May, I've been applying to positions at the Coastal Commission, and I luckily got offered this role as enforcement analyst. So that's how I got here.
Amazing. Thank you all for sharing a little bit about your paths. Speaking a little bit more about paths, we received a lot of questions prior to the webinar series related to career transitions and moving into policy from other backgrounds. So, for example, as David just mentioned, more natural science backgrounds or something that's non-ocean related. How did you transition from research to policy, and are there any advice or skills that you would recommend cultivating for somebody who's looking to follow a similar career path? Alanna, would you be interested in taking that one?
Sure, yeah. So I think, as Dewi just mentioned, kind of the geology background and transitioning into policy to think more about like how the coast matters to people and that kind of thing is it's really great. And I think it seems like this tricky thing to make this transition, but a lot of the people that we work with at the commission have a science background or have a research background outside of policy. So I think I don't see it as a negative at all to have that background coming into policy work, but you do have to, prove you can make that transition. So there's some structured opportunities to do that. Brandon mentioned an internship, or Megan, I believe you said you're a science policy fellow as well. And those structured opportunities are great when they're available. But I guess when I think about kind of proving that you can make that transition, I think there's some other things you can do as well, right? You have the training, you have the science training that science training helps you understand the policy implications of the project on the environment. You can interpret climate change data. You could look at how policy will impact environment and communities. So have confidence in your training. And then when thinking about trying to prove that, um, one of the things I talk about with people a lot is kind of like what have you done in grad school? You've managed a project, you've collaborated, you've worked with constraints, right? Your dissertation or thesis wasn't handed to you. You had to go and figure out how to work around different pieces of it. That's problem solving, communication. You've interrogated data sources for your lit review. Those are all really critical things in the policy role. And so figuring out how to talk about those things that you've done, that you know how to do, that you're trained for, but in that policy context. So look at how the job posting is talking about them. Look at how the duty statement is talking about them. Cal HR offers some guides. Like try and figure out that language and talking about what you have done, the training you have, specifically how it applies to those future roles would be one thing that I would want to think about. And then also from the research, from research land, like you're doing this research and it's very specific. You're in this space where there's not information and you're trying to answer these questions. We do that in policy as well, but we have to speak about them more broadly. So thinking about opportunities when you're working in the research space and then transitioning, proving that you can transition into policy, thinking about opportunities to talk to the public about your research, kind of broaden out the implications of what you're talking about, or rather than going to a conference and presenting findings to people who are really tight in your discipline, go to something more broad, go to a different academic discipline, do that public workshop. So really thinking about you have the skills to make that transition into policy now, like how to prove that.
Thanks, Alanna. I really like that framing of sort of you have the skill sets and learning how to talk about yourself more in terms of the skills that you gain as opposed to sort of the specific expertise that you have. I think that's really valuable. Building a little bit more on what you were just getting at in terms of what are some of the sort of tasks that translate. I'm curious for all of the panelists, what daily or regular tasks does your role entail? And what are some of the favorite things that you've gotten to do in your position? Maybe we'll start with Brandon again and go through everybody.
Yeah, so I guess it's like, like a mix of like joining like team meetings, like public access or like sea-level rise planning meetings over Zoom, and then like going into the office and then like hearing about like local like district issues that like as permits or like local coastal programs are like coming in for our review in the region. And then like coordinating across teams, so like working with like Alanna over like public access like things, and then like or transportation and like public access. Um and kind of like my work covers different kinds of topics like sea level rise. So I helped with like the sea level rise guidance, like writing like chapter 4. So that's like a cool thing. And then like how it impacts communities, and then like housing, like working on fair housing in the coastal zone. That's like another highlight from my fellowship. And then like also with all the new like housing laws that are coming in, like how does it overlap with the Coastal Act, and like trying to come up with guidance like internally, but then also for local governments, like cities and counties about like how they implement it in their region. And then I guess like the most like favorite thing that I've done is like do like a bill analysis and support for the Coastal Commission, and then I like presented that at a hearing and took like a support of it. And then after it was passed in like 2025, worked on like the implementation of that with the Department of California Natural Resources Agency, which we're housed under as the commission. And then like also like working with cities and counties of like how does that actually get implemented within their own like region and stuff. And then most recently, that bill got like a shout out at the Outdoors for All convening that took place earlier this week. And by like nonprofits of because basically AB 2939 is supposed to increase access for groups of 30 or less that want to take events at like local parks and beaches, and that like is supposed to be targeted to help nonprofits and like tribal groups that want to take part in like events and stuff without having to deal with like the administrative costs um and like the extra like permitting or like stuff like that. So it just kind of makes it easier to hold events. So I think that's probably, something that's like still coming up today where we're still trying to work on that. But yeah. And then I'll pass it over to Eric.
The commission's transportation program works closely with Caltrans on highways in the coastal zone, and then also local governments often on public access and local road projects. And um, it's an interesting role because a lot of the projects we work on are really large scale infrastructure projects. So on one hand, we're protecting the existing access, which all these roadways are. But on the other hand, like these is one of the biggest threats to the coast. Like hundreds of miles of highway could need shoreline armoring in the future. So we're really focused on coastal resilience and adaptation. So for me, two of the things that I really enjoy with this role is being part of these really good projects that maybe can remove a highway or move it back or work on long-term adaptation 10 or 20 years from now. And then building those partnerships with Caltrans and other agency partners to kind of get a shared vision of protecting the coast while at the same time protecting this public access resources. And I'll pass it to Alanna.
Thanks. So yeah, so my role in the GIS mapping unit, my day-to-day is a lot of jurisdictional mapping. So one of the reasons the Coastal Act is able to have the protections it does is because the jurisdictional boundaries are determined by environmental situations. So we're having to look at data and historic tidelands maps, wetlands, LIDAR, all kinds of stuff to make sure that we're understanding where our jurisdiction falls and make sure that we're able to speak to those places and preserve those resources accordingly. So that's a lot of my day-to-day in the regs, using data to interpret, do some other data analysis and interpretation for staff. And one of my favorite things that I get to do sometimes is build viewers for staff that centralize and incorporate a lot of different data. So like the environmental justice viewer, where we have a bunch of different layers to allow staff and applicants to be able to look at various projects and how various factors in communities might be affected, alternatives for improving those projects, and together on that. So um, that's one of the cool things that I get to do through my role, and I will pass it to Dewi.
Thanks, Alanna. So more broadly, the enforcement program is really tasked to uphold the Coastal Act, and we ensure that our coastal resources like public access, coastal habitats, recreation are available to the public, and to ensure that those continue. And I guess we hear about violations through members of the public or through development permits that I guess are out of compliance. So a lot of, and I guess our program and kind of my role is to do those investigations. So it's a lot of reading, it's a lot of research and writing, but kind of pulling that all together. I think the essence of kind of my work is a lot of critical thinking and developing narratives and almost a story about, so what has happened at this site? What kind of development has occurred? And how does this impact our coastline and impacts the resources we're trying to protect? And always bringing it back to the Coastal Act, which is really the foundation of kind of the work we do at the Coastal Commission. And that's a lot of my day-to-day is a lot of reading, writing, those critical thinking skills that you develop in grad school in kind of no matter what field you're in. I think those skills of utilizing data, mapping, all sorts of like policy, all kind of using kind of that interdisciplinary thinking and thought process to kind of pull together everything in order to like protect our coast.
Awesome. Thank you all for sharing. It's really interesting to hear sort of how different your roles are within the same organization. Another question we have for you is your job kind of what you expected it would be when you started, and either when you started your job or when you were first interested in this field? Eric, do you want to take that one?
Sure. Just going to just the different jobs that the four of us have, I think that's one of the coolest things about the commission is that it's based on the Coastal Act, which is purposely written very broadly. So there's a lot of different areas to focus on. And at the commission, you can you start in one area, and if you're interested in something else, move to that field. So I would say for me, I didn't expect to be working on transportation. I had done a lot of construction before grad school, so I was interested more in the development side, maybe the smaller scale residential or shoreline armoring aspects and beach preservation. But just working at the commission, you get exposed to so many different types of projects, and so I'm happy where I landed, but I wasn't anticipating at all. And another thing about the commission is it's just the culture. Um, the management really wants the staff to kind of thrive and be autonomous and motivated by what they do. So there's really a culture to have people find what they like to do and then support those goals.
That's really wonderful to hear. Another question that we have for everyone is, how do you get to use your strengths in your job? I feel like I've heard a couple of you sort of allude to that already. And on the flip side, what aspects of your job do you maybe find most challenging or least glamorous? Because there are those aspects in every job. Maybe we'll start with Brandon and go around to everyone.
Yeah, I think like probably like different strengths I think would be good, or just like kind of like how do you like like Dewi said, like you do like a lot of like reading and writing, and like how do you like critically like think about like how do I communicate this to the specific type of audience that I'm trying to reach? Like, is it senior leadership at the commission? Is it like the public? Is it a local government? And then try and like articulate it like as you can, or kind of like break it down in the way that's needed. Um, and thinking about like, like all of like the master's work that I did, it was like living shorelines and then trying to like tie that to like education and policy and environmental justice. Um, and kind of like the same way, like you're seeing like the commission does like a lot of different things. And it's like real issues that are like in front of us. And it's kind of like, okay, now how do we like combine like how is it gonna affect the people, and the animals and the development, and then how do we do sea level rise later here? Because we're dealing with like the coast or like offshore, and there's just like a lot of different kinds of like hazards that are coming in or like being exacerbated by sea level rise. So I guess it's kind of like when I was doing like my California Sea Grant interview, they said it's kind of like everything everywhere all at once at the commission. And that's kind of like I guess like how I felt what I did with my master's, like trying to combine a lot of different kinds of things. Um, and like being able to like switch depending on like if I'm working with like a nonprofit or like different kinds of things for my master's, and then now talking with nonprofits like about like these different coastal issues. Um, yeah, so I think that that's kind of just you're really trying to reorient yourself, I guess, a little bit into like how you want to communicate, and that's probably like the best thing. Just take like a second to be like, okay, writing this message is like, what do I really need to like say? Or like what's needed to get across. And I guess like the most challenging part is I don't know, like sometimes you'll write the whole staff report and then like you'll take it in front of the commission, and then like you can recommend like approval, but then the commissioners can decide from it going from approval or approval with special conditions or denial, or kind of like maybe even consider like withdrawal if it's um, yeah, in certain situations. So yeah, you don't really know like what's gonna happen once the item is taken to hearing, and maybe that's like a little bit where like timelines can go a little bit longer. Um, but yeah, and then maybe you like think you had like the approach, but there's like some things with the Coastal Act that maybe could have been integrated a little bit better, and then we have to like come back, look at the project, and be like, okay, how according to all these COSAC policies, how do we make it align the best? Or is there like an alternative that might work better? So yeah, and then I'll pass it over to Eric.
I would say a lot of the jobs at the Coastal Commission are akin to project management, just taking a really hard problem and breaking it into pieces and then figuring out how to get each of those pieces accomplished, which I think probably applies to any graduate school big project you're doing, and something you should story out and be ready to talk about at your interviews. Because even if you haven't directly worked in planning, it's the same skills that would carry over to figure out how to get to an answer on these complex questions. Um, And then also most or all of the big projects that the commission gets done are built on coalitions. You can't really force a big project through. The commission can try, but it won't work. So you need a lot of partners. So building those coalitions is probably the biggest thing that needs to happen. And that's also probably the most frustrating thing because especially with different agencies and members of the public and property owners, they all have their different missions that drive them that they need to stick with. So finding that balance between everything is really difficult. Alanna?
Yeah. Yeah, I think for me, a couple of the strengths that I get to bring to the job, and I think directly from grad school, and I think this has been mentioned by others, are that critical thinking. How do we get this, for me, data? What are we looking at? How do we develop this? What does it mean? Are we using it appropriately? I mean, that's direct grad school skills. That's really important to how I do my work. And yeah, like thinking about kind of the scales that I like to work at is one thing that I think about with my job. So I get to be super detailed down in the data, but then I also get to have this big picture thought. And I think Eric mentioned in his last answer, I mean, this is mission driven work. Like we are upholding the Coastal Act. That's what we do as an agency. And so that's great. And it's great to have that meaning behind our work. But sometimes that means that you're rolling up your sleeves and doing things that you're like, I don't know how to do. You're problem solving. So in my specific role, and I'm sure everyone has examples in every in every field, but definitely at this agency, for me in GIS land, that means that sometimes I'm real deep into IT stuff that I don't know how to do, but we're going to figure out because the outcome is important. So there's always those challenges, but it does feel good to have, you know what you're contributing to overall, even if the exact thing you're fulfilling at the time is like, oh my gosh, how are we gonna do this? Maybe.
Yeah, I think just to reiterate what all of my peers have been saying, the critical thinking aspect is definitely such a pillar to this work. I would also like to continue to highlight the interdisciplinary nature of between I guess the data side of it, the policy, and I guess like driving like equity as well into it. Like you're taking all of these aspects that feel so different, and you're really bringing them in. And really in enforcement, what I've really loved about it was seeing how was one like the storytelling aspect of it and kind of developing a narrative and like between like the site history and seeing how a site and a property has changed over time and from when it was out in violation of the Coastal Act, like a lot of degradation to like a marshland, for example, and then seeing how the commission has taken a stance to restore that property into something like a very healthy and lush marsh. So that has been like one of the most one of the most I have like great aspects of this job of like seeing how those have changed over time. And it's happened slowly. I've been kind of reviewing a lot of the backlog cases. So stuff that has been in stuff from 25 years ago. And it's been super interesting. Yeah, how it's changed over time. As a new hire, I think some of the challenges from the job, which some of my peers have kind of alluded to a little bit, is how broad the Coastal Act is, and everyone is doing so many different things. So that was definitely really overwhelming to come into, and it was really overwhelming to come into, and I was like, oh, I don't know what's happening between commission hearings that happen every single month, and planners doing their thing, working on deadlines, and the mapping program and transportation. It's a lot happening, so it's definitely really overwhelming. But what I've found really helpful is asking questions to people, and just you learn by doing, to be quite honest. As you do things, you'll make mistakes, but also learn from them. And that's been super helpful. And just, you have to try to figure it out. And that's been super rewarding so far. And definitely I've seen how far I've come over the past 3 months from my first day being super confused what's been happening to 3 months later being like, oh, I understand what's happening in these programs and understand how like the commission hearings are run and stuff. So it's been super gratifying work then at the end of the day.
Thank you all for your thoughtful responses. It sounds like you're all contending with a lot of moving parts. Dewi, building on the response that you just gave as somebody who is sort of newer to their role, is there anything you wish you had known kind of coming into this job or into this role?
That's a great question. I've been like kind of thinking about that recently, and I think I'll reiterate what I kind of like just mentioned is that I feel like when you first start a role, you're always like, I feel like I should know everything, and my training and being in grad school should have prepared me for this. But I think over time, I was like, oh, okay, I can take a step back and understand that like you're not going to know everything your first day, your first week, your first month at the job, and that I really feel that the Coastal Commission is a very collaborative space that you can ask these questions, and the more you do, the more you will learn on the job and kind of figure out by trial and error how things are run and kind of like your place in the commission and like the way you do your work. So yeah, I think that's what I've like learned so far.
That makes a lot of sense. And as somebody who is relatively new to my role, I can definitely appreciate that sometimes it feels like a steep on-ramp, even if your expectations of yourself might be higher than and then those you're actually working for at those initial stages. Um, I guess moving more towards sort of skills and kind of what you're saying about, thinking that grad school is going to prepare you for certain things. I'm curious, what was sort of the most important skill that you learned as a graduate student that you use in your job today? I think I'll pass that to maybe Brandon and then Alanna.
Yeah, so I think probably like what we were saying about like gathering info like really quickly about something you really don't know about and then trying to like become the expert and then somehow you're like trying to coordinate with your team about like, oh, does this sound okay, and then like going back and forth and kind of getting approvals across like different units. At least like in a statewide unit we're trying to like like have statewide consistency, so then we talk with like district people and then the different units and be like, okay, like the technical expertise and the regional expertise to really like align how it is, and then we go back to looking at the Coastal Act. I think that's kind of like you coordinate with like your research team a little bit, and then like with your advisor, and then trying to get like feedback across like different people and stuff, and then being like, okay, like when I'm putting this into my thesis, like is this gonna be defensible, or is someone gonna like say something in a presentation and be like, um, but yeah, and then probably like the other piece that maybe felt like a little bit secondary or can come secondary as a grad student is like that like public engagement part where you're like, okay, like how do I like communicate this like data to like restoration practitioners, but also like we did like oyster shell string events where we talked to like local boaters about like how much like like the reproduction cycle of the oysters, and then like, oh, if you put these like on the side of your boat, like you'll be able to grow some, and then we come back and analyze them, and then kind of like that like back and forth engagement with like the public when they come back like 3 months later to look at their baby oysters is like something that you think about where like Davey mentioned the hearings that happen every month. So that's like you have to coordinate with like whoever like you're like trying to process a permit for and being like, okay, so this is where we are, and kind of like different kinds of things. And then yeah, just the other thing that we mentioned was the like really like interdisciplinary part. Like I think the more interdisciplinary you can make your thesis, or like think about like the different like aspects that overlap with it, through like different internships that you can kind of do. Or just like asking your advisor like, oh, like have we coordinated in the past with like tribal leadership on this, something like that, or like how have we worked with nonprofits on this before. Maybe you could be the one to start it, or maybe there was already an existing relationship that you could try to like leverage, so that kind of like experience of taking everything. But yeah, and then I'll pass it to Alana.
Yeah, the good point with all of the interdisciplinary different tie-ins and all of our work. And yeah, funny enough for me, I got GIS training in grad school just because why not? And here I am in a GIS role 7 years later. So, um, but I think that I would actually point to the journal that you guys have as part of this series. I think is really great because it talks about like how do you like to work. And so like, okay, I never expected to be in a GIS role, but that is, like the way I like to work and the way like what I feel like I can contribute, it's a good fit. Never expected it, never saw it coming, but here we are. And so I think that some of those questions as you're thinking about a role you want to fill are really important. Like what is your approach in the day to day? What place do you want to have within this project team? I mean, as you can probably tell from listening to all of us, and Brandon just mentioned kind of the interdisciplinary nature of the commission, we're all working on different projects with different, we're working on a project with tribal here and we're working on a project with transportation. Like we're all over the place. We're looking at wetland restoration. I was talking about, you know, before this, I had a meeting this morning where we talked about sediment and where we talked about like detailed policy jurisdictional transfer. Like we're all over the place topic wise. And so you can have all of these different topic interests, but thinking through some of those, like how do I like to work? How do I like to show up? What are my work styles? It's really important as you think about the role in addition to some of like in addition to the topics that you would think about in grad school.
Thank you both for the thoughtful responses. Eric and Dewi, did you want to add anything to that? No worries if not.
I could just add just getting things done, like with these really hard problems, just figuring out how to not just spin around in circles and just how to complete stuff is so crucial to every role at the commission. And I think grad school sets you up really well for that because you have to like prioritize. You probably have more work than you can do, and you figure out what's important and just be intentional about it and then get it to that final product.
Yeah, I think you guys covered a lot of my thoughts already. So what they said.
Great. And we have an incoming question from the Q&A that is sort of related to this, but on the flip side, and I can pose it to whoever is curious or willing to answer. So we sort of asked, what are sort of the best skills that you can take from graduate school into your position? I guess the opposite question is sort of what did grad school not really prepare you for in terms of this position? And what do you find are some of those key differences between the academic world and the world that you are all navigating now?
Um, well, I don't know if maybe you all have like heard this before, but it's kind of like the master's is more like the research side, and then you're kind of like going to like these like niche like kind of conferences, and then like I guess like the most broad was like the like nonprofits or like talking to like restoration practitioners about like how it could get like applied, but then yeah, more in like the government role, you're like taking the science and then turning it into like policies. So like for sea level rise, like we have to like understand the like existing conditions of the area and then do like a vulnerability assessment. And that's like step one to be like, okay, what's vulnerable or like what's assets are you move to like the adaptation plan, and then that's like more like okay, like what are we gonna do, like a retreat or accommodate or like what works in like these kinds of areas, and then after that then it can turn into like a local coastal program that's like informed by like the science, and then I guess that's like my role looking more at like the local coastal programs or trying to like look at how like the policies are written in a way that like matches the intent that we want the coastal act to be like aligned with, so that is could be written differently across like different regions, but um, trying to like help get out those like policy pieces, I think is like more of like the government side of it, and then like dealing with like okay, not just like the science, but like how's it gonna get implemented? That's like the like hard part, I guess.
Thanks, Brandon. Did anybody else want to add on to that?
I'll add on. I think one of the things that grad school didn't really prepare me for was probably a lot more of the public outreach side of my job, because you're interfacing with everyone and anyone under the sun, and not everyone believes in climate change. Not everyone believes in the mission of the Coastal Commission. And you have to talk and communicate with people respectfully and kind of explain, especially my role in enforcement, is you're explaining to them why they might need to be applying for a coastal development permit, and that and that why it could be hurting the environment, those actions of development that they took on their property, and kind of coming to amicable resolutions, even though you might not be seeing quite eye to eye on things, but finding common ground. And I think that public outreach side, isn't quite talked about that much in grad school. I think I took it was like a 1 day like class on it, but it wasn't something we went in depth about, when you don't see eye to eye with people, how do you really like move through that?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I feel like you tend to sort of incidentally end up with people who have a narrower set of views in an academic environment than you do when doing public outreach. Pivoting a little bit to sort of the job search. I know, Dewi, you're sort of newer to your position, and a lot of the folks that will be attending will also might be their first time applying to jobs. What are some of the best places to look for positions and find opportunities in your experience?
Yeah, so I knew coming out of grad school, I kind of knew I wanted to work in a government role. I really aligned with the values of government just because I knew I really wanted to be in a position of helping people and being in service, was definitely one of my pillars for moving into the work environment. So I was very diligent about checking I guess like government websites. And once I knew I wanted to work at a state level. So once I kind of figured out honestly, the couple of states I wanted to work in, I'm originally from the East Coast. I just kind of did research on specific agencies within those states that really aligned with my values, and just really stalked their pages consistently to see like openings, and just really throwing my hat in a ring for anything and everything that came that opened up. So luckily I found this position in enforcement, which really kind of aligned with both my values and like skill set of critical thinking, and critical thinking research, which really I didn't quite think would be the right fit for me, but turns out it really was. So I'm super grateful for that opportunity. So yeah.
Yeah, would any of the other panelists like to add on to that? And sorry, there's also a little bit more to add on to that from some questions that have come in. If you did interview for your role, how did you position yourself in your interview to feel sort of less fresh and confidently speak about your strengths, skills, and knowledge? So Dewi, if you wanted to add anything onto that, but then also open to any of the other panelists who want to answer.
Sure. I feel like I knew I wanted to work in an interdisciplinary environment. So when I was in my interviews, I kind of really drew on a lot of the interdisciplinary work I did in grad school, and how it would align kind of with the Coastal Commission. And so like talking about how, the data and the science, but also like the policy aspect. So really trying to bring in as much as possible. And I really started that in my grad school experience. I started that in grad school. So when I kind of came time to do those interviews, I kind of set myself up in a way that I was like, oh, I already have this experience starting to do research in interdisciplinary, and I want to continue this at an institution that continues to hold up those values and that mission. yeah, so like starting early is like super important. And then just honestly, practice interviewing really helped me. Um, finding a friend who was very honest with me about the way I spoke. And yeah, really going through like those questions and stuff was very helpful.
Um, I recently, we recently hired in our program, so I was sitting on the other side of that. But the advice I'd have is to just have like at least a half a dozen stories about just major professional or academic accomplishments. Just because when you're sitting on an interview panel, if someone's not talking about a specific story, it's really easy to kind of tone out. It's more aspirational, and that's not really what you're looking for when you're hiring. So like really tangible stories about work you did, and then really focus on if it was a team project, don't focus on what your team achieved. Focus, like mention that, but really highlight what your role was and like how you interacted with your team and like specifically how you accomplished something. Um, and then the third part I would say is just kind of do a deep dive on the position or agency you're going to. And with the commission, it's pretty easy because all our agendas are public. So you could just look at what that unit, what work they've done over the last year, and like specifically mention projects that you reviewed and what you liked about them, and then tie it directly to work you've done. And if you're creative, you can really like make a lot of connections no matter your background.
And I don't know if this is too up on the practical side, but if you're really interested in working for the state of California, you have to take what are called exams. They're basically like looking at your resume and understanding what your experience is and how it aligns with the HR structure. So what I would recommend is if you're interested, take all the exams. Get on, because when you get on the exam list, you get emails about every position. And you could like kind of sort it by location or whatever, but then you're getting one, you've thought about how your experience lines up with the different positions, the different roles. So if you're like there's coastal program analysts here, you could also be on the environmental scientist list, like whatever list, there's probably multiples. You've thought through the experience, you've thought through what they're already looking for, and now you're getting emails with every time there's a position listed. So that never hurts when you're when you're looking for jobs. And would just second what Eric said. I just sat on an interview panel where the applicant came and they had watched some of our commission hearing. I mean, it was really impressive. They really knew a lot, even with no experience in the field at all. So it's really good to look into that. And my gosh, my thing. Oh, when you're interviewing, you're meeting people in the field, and so sitting on an interview panel, you talk to so many wonderfully qualified people. It's overwhelming, and there's so many people who could do the job you're applying for. And so trying to think of that as an opportunity to meet other people, like interviews are tough and it's a tough market, but interviews are a form of networking as well. So just thinking of it in those terms, if that's helpful, you're moving forward with the role.
If I could add one more thing based on what Alanna said, like oftentimes when there's an opening at the commission, there's a lot of people that are probably could do the job and are qualified, but there might only be one or two openings. So don't give up. Like if you don't get the job the first two or three or four times, just keep applying. It's not a personal thing. It's a lot of it's just luck that you just happen to be the best applicant at that point, and just keep at it. I think I definitely applied for the same job multiple times before I got it at the commission. And it's just what you need to do at when there's so few openings to applicants.
Thank you all. That was so much encouraging and very thoughtful advice. Um, there's a new question that has come in from the Q&A here. For those of you that have been at the commission for a while, how have you felt the commission has supported your continued professional development and advancement within the agency? So maybe Eric and Alanna for that one, but anybody as well.
I think it's super supportive. There's kind of the general culture that if somebody wants to do something different, their management are gonna support that. If you want to grow and try something new, you're just gonna get supported in that. It's a real like just the mission focus. Like we're all protecting coastal resources and access, and that when it comes down to it, that's what everyone really cares about. And they know if people aren't happy, they're going to leave. So if you have a good employee, you want to keep them at the agency and help them grow so they don't go somewhere else.
I'd echo that. And for advancement, and then special interests you have, just kind of asking, working with people, trying to kind of share what you can. The commission has been really supportive, and asking for trainings. If there's, just ask if there's money available for trainings. I've found the commission to be very supportive of.
Um, yeah, and then just adding on to that, like from my master's, like how I did living shorelines, like now we're working on like the nature-based adaptation strategies guidance, and I'm like have the Newport Bay example that I worked on for my master's as an example in the guidance. So kind of like being like intimately like familiar and then like growing on that experience. And then yeah, like across like my different like portfolio, like if there's any like changes to it, like they always like gauge my interest, like how much do you like this? Like do you want more of this? So like I guess like one example is like I do have a lot of like grant management experience. I'm like the North Coast grant manager and like part of like LA. So like one of the things that I'm like interested in is like housing and like getting more experience with like doing that guidance and stuff is so yeah, I'm not gonna do North Coast anymore. I'm gonna do like just LA, so that way I can have more capacity to do like housing stuff. But before any of that like happened, like management checked in to see like what I liked, and they asked me like, how would you like rank all of these different things based off of your interest? And then from that, they talked with all of the staff and they rearranged like how like what assignments everyone's gonna get and stuff. So I think like for me, like what I'm focused on is like what skills like do I already have and then what skills I feel like I'm still missing. So like instead of like being redundant in like the stuff, then maybe being like, okay, I haven't done this before. So adding to like my skill set in that way. Um, and really trying to add on to it like as early as I can. So like whatever like things you can like jump on to be like, oh yeah, I kind of like did this, and then you kind of like start growing your like story list of like the different things or like different impact that you specifically had, like how Eric mentioned, and then yeah, like from your 6 stories, like I'm sure they're gonna like remember a couple, and then that'll also help you stand out.
Thank you all for those thoughtful responses. Kind of building on this point of either, the ways in which the Coastal Commission encourages your professional growth or other aspects, what do you find particularly motivating either about the work that you do in the day-to-day or about the mission of the organization? I think we'll start with Eric, but then open it up to anybody who wants to answer.
For this one, I would say like we're the Coastal Commission there, it's based on a state law, and there's always the threat of being sued for taking an action that's not consistent with that law. So that's kind of something that's in the background. So we have to have a really reasonable, thought out approach. But the way we get there, there's just a lot of encouragement to be creative. Like if there's a way to protect resources or to add in a new public access way, most of those ideas are coming from our frontline staff. So it's just you're not just doing the same thing every day. Like if you have an idea, like you're going to get the encouragement to pursue it and try it out. If it doesn't work, that's fine. But a lot of really cool stuff can happen. Just one person can make a change. And oftentimes you can actually see that change physically constructed or an area preserved. At one of my first project was a project to build, I think, 19 just really big houses right in a habitat area next to a lagoon, and we were able to say no to that. It wasn't consistent with the Coastal Act, and now I can drive by it whenever I'm in San Diego and see this incredible preserve instead of gated housing development.
Thank you, Eric. That's a really powerful example. Does anybody else have examples to add?
Yeah, I think what's been like super super cool about working at the Coastal Commission so far is kind of what Eric had mentioned, is that you are living, you're working where you live, and that's been super interesting. Like when I drive around Los Angeles and Orange County, I can see I'm like, oh, that looks like one of the violations I've been like working on. And it's just like happening. It's happening, I don't know, right in front of you. And that's been really interesting and seeing, oh, this used to be a blocked access way 5 years ago. And now, this is an open access point that has been closed for so many years. That's now very open to the public. Yeah, and that's been super rewarding about this work is seeing that changed like in real time.
Thanks, Dewi. Brandon and Alanna, did you have anything you wanted to add?
I think everyone's just like really like grounded by the mission of, the commission of like wanting to protect the ocean. And like really like no matter like what comes like towards like the staff, like this like key thing of wanting to protect the ocean just keeps us all really like close and together. I don't know. Like Alanna was at a retreat last week, and then she sent me some pictures of some otters and we were just like, yeah, it's just reminds us of really like all the time of like we're like how Eric said at the front lines of this thing and really trying to uphold the Coastal Act and coastal resources for a long time.
Amazing. Well, thank you all for your thoughtful response. Sorry, I should, Alanna, did you want to add anything or are we good to wrap? Good. Okay, sorry. Thank you all for your thoughtful responses to all of the questions throughout this panel. And thank you all to the attendees for your attention and engagement. Though not all panels will be recorded, this one will be available for future reference on OST's website soon on the 2026 Sea Change Scholars webinar series page. Our next monthly webinar will be on March 5th from 12 to 1, so again on a Thursday. We will have, at that panel, we will have staff from the California Department of Fish and Wildlife to share their insights. Actually, I can share a QR code that for that as well. Just a moment here. Sorry. Hopefully you can all see that. If you haven't already, be sure to sign up for future webinars using the QR code that you can hopefully now see. And don't forget, if you weren't able to make it, or if you would like a quick refresher throughout the webinar series, there is a recording of the first webinar that we put on, and the accompanying slides are available on our website. And that first webinar is a 30-minute overview of California's coastal and ocean agency landscape, which covers the various state entities that are sort of operating within the ocean and coastal sphere. So thank you again to our amazing panelists, and for all of the attendees, we hope to see you next time. Thank you very much.